Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the REOvolution podcast. I'm Sarah Cridland, I'm the lead optimization strategist for Rio Digital. We offer CRO and UX services for clients to help them improve their businesses. And I'm lucky to be joined today by Kelsey from FullStory, who we're going to talk digital trends for 2023. So hi Kelsey, and thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here. I'm Kelsey. I'm a sales engineer at FullStory, which means I partner closely with customers looking at FullStory to optimize their websites. So FullStory is a digital experience intelligence platform that surfaces where people are frustrated, confused, running into bugs, issues, and just UX paper cuts so that online retailers and financial institutions and anyone with a website or a mobile app can improve their digital experience.
Great, and I was interested to see about the survey you ran recently, which was to try and uncover what consumers are thinking at the moment to identify what are going to be the big digital trends for 2023. So how did that report come about, and what kind of methods did you use?
Yeah, so that report came about with the change in, what are people thinking when it comes to online purchases, interacting with your banking app, your gambling site, whatever it may be, how that's changing, especially right now with the economy changing and with changes in expectations from the apps and websites that you use. So we surveyed around 7,000 consumers across a number of different countries to understand what are their experiences and expectations when it comes to digital experience.
Mm-hmm. So obviously it'll be interesting to see the outcome of the report, because obviously there's a huge amount of economic uncertainty in the world at the moment. So did you find any differences in terms of how consumers were maybe responding to that uncertainty?
Absolutely. 50% of respondents said that they are thinking about cutting back on spending in the coming months or year. And interestingly, actually, to kind of discourage themselves from spending and from that kind of shopping mindlessly, people are, and actually 1 in 10 consumers have just undownloaded mobile apps from shopping.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of if it's not there, you can't
make
it harder to shop. Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind. It's kind of harder to get to those consumers.
So it's interesting you say that consumers are trying to cut back on their spending. I think we're seeing that with rising acquisition costs, in the fact that the consumers that do land on your site are making much more considered purchases. So whereas the mindless purchases we'd see in the past, maybe users are being a lot more conscious of their spending and therefore thinking, do I really need this before making a purchase? So I know the cost of acquisition is getting higher as well across the board. So now is the time really to make sure that you are getting the most out of every user that comes to your site, every pound that you spend in marketing to get people to your site. You want to be making the most out of that.
Yeah, so we asked respondents, do you have, what is your experience, is your experience very positive, I think all the way down to negative with digital properties in different industries? And so the best performing industry was retail, actually. So the highest percentage of users in that, engaging with that industry who responded that their experience is positive versus those other 11 industries, which means it's great for consumers in the retail space, but for retailers, for an individual retailer, that bar is pretty high.
Yeah, I think we see that in conversion rate optimization as well, in the fact that it's the success rate for retail CRO testing is slightly lower than financial services, because I think financial services is much more scope to improve because they are less mature in their digital experiences, whereas retailers have obviously are much more mature in the quality of the digital experience. So I think we see that also is that retail are way ahead of financial services in terms of their digital experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely something that we see when working with clients, bringing things in. So when you think about optimizing, it's they may have fantastic flows already built out that don't have too many errors. And when we talk about like what is a fantastic flow, so that fantastic and easy journey from landing page, exploring, looking at products, finally to actually purchasing, what consumers are looking for is something quick and simple. They want it to be easy to do. They don't want to get lost, and they don't want to be running around the site spending a bunch of time trying to just accomplish something. And so we'll often see that the retailers we work with already have a pretty good flow. So when it comes to optimization, there are still quick wins that something like a tool like FullStory can help you uncover where people are maybe not running into terrible issues, but they're dead clicking somewhere. So they click on something and nothing happens. So they've got this expectation. Maybe it's to get more information about a product, or they're going to print a receipt or something, and they click on it and nothing happens. So there was a missed opportunity, and those little things do add up and leave you with this feeling of like, it wasn't that easy. Like I can do what I wanted to do, but it was kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
And so there are still those kind of smaller places that you can work on optimizing your site.
Yeah, I think as we were saying with the retail sites being more mature, that doesn't mean that things can't go wrong or stop working or cause frustration somewhere. And I think there's two sides to it, isn't there? There's the conversion rate optimization, so identifying the issues that are going to stop people in their tracks and stop them from converting. But the other side, like you mentioned, is just the overall feeling the user has when they leave your site, is that even if they've managed to achieve what they wanted to achieve, has it left them feeling really frustrated because it wasn't working? And that plays a role. So I thought it was really interesting in your report where you had something around brand loyalty.
Yeah.
Could you talk us through the findings from that? Because I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah, so we found that users aren't actually, on average, that invested or loyal to specific companies. What they are much more invested in and what they are much more loyal to is actually the experiences that they have.
Yeah.
So they are very happy to leave, be it stop in their tracks or just not return to make an additional purchase later on and go to another company. So we actually found that 70% of users, when they do come across a frustrating experience, will leave and go elsewhere.
Yeah.
And different from, say, a brick and mortar store, when you're online, it's a click away. Like, it's so quick and easy to find a competitor. And I think one thing we talked about earlier is the number of competitors, the number of players in the space isn't really changing that much right now, even while consumers are spending less. So that goes back to that point you brought up about it's more and more expensive to acquire users.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting point, is that I think a lot of the older, well-established brands probably rely too heavily on the fact that they're older, well-established, a trusted name, and so therefore don't have this same drive to make the experience as good as maybe a new player in the market. But I imagine as the demographic of the population changes and you get new generations coming through that no longer have those ties to those old brands like their parents' generation did necessarily, then its experience is going to be the key differentiator. Because, when it goes back to the days of having a bricks and mortar store, like you say, you've seen that name on the high street, they're well established, you trust them. But when it comes to the online space, I thought it was really interesting that the experience is king as opposed to the brand identity itself.
Yeah. I had this experience the other day. I was looking for vegan protein powders, and turns out there are like a ton of them.
Yeah.
So just Googling what can I find, and
Yeah.
and opening up a few sites and just where can I get the information I need quickly, and from there, how easy is it to add it to my cart, to explore between, and they're all sites that just do that. They're all very specialized, and so wanted to add it to my cart, and then get it shipped for free, get it quickly, and have that process be very easy. So I opened up a few tabs and ended up landing on one that just made it simple.
Yeah, exactly. I think we were talking as well about the mobile side of things as well. Is if often a purchase journey will start on mobile, where you're not ready to buy yet, but you're roughly browsing. And if the mobile experience is really bad, you're much less likely to continue with that brand, even if the desktop version's great, where you might then end up making a purchase, especially if it's a complex purchase like a holiday or something like that, where there's a lot of research involved. But yeah, it's just making sure that there are multiple stages of the journey you need to cater to, and that everything is optimized. So I thought that was really interesting. So I suppose we should talk about what is a good experience versus a bad experience. So did your report have any insights into what consumers consider to be a bad experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So the number one thing that consumers really don't like, and this is one of those things that'll just stop them in their tracks and they'll leave, is slow loading pages. So when you sit there and you're like, I'm ready to, I'm somewhere along that line of purchasing. I'm trying to load up more information so I can read reviews or so I can add it to my cart, and the page is just hanging there and I don't know what's going on. That people just leave. So slow loading pages is huge, and then page load errors as well. So a 404, like a broken link.
Yeah.
You want to read this blog post about this holiday destination so I can get more context before I actually make that purchase.
Yeah.
It leads me to a dead link, and like, gosh, and you lose a lot of trust in the website as well.
Yeah, you do. You go, especially, I think people are much more trusting with putting their credit card details into things than they used to be. But it's still a factor of like slight mistrust. I don't trust this is working correctly.
Yeah.
So it does have an impact.
Yeah, and only more so when you're holding onto your money more tightly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how can users start to identify where their site speed issues are occurring? Because obviously FullStory can help with that. So how does that surface those issues?
Yeah, so I'm biased, but for obvious reasons. But you have to capture all of the data. So I think one of the places, and this is really where I think we're seeing digital experience intelligence move in general, is capturing everything. So all of the interactions, where are people clicking, where are they navigating to, where are they getting frustrated, so where are they clicking really, really quickly? They're not super engaged. You might have 50 clicks on this add to cart button, and it's actually just slow. It's not high engagement, it's actually a frustrating experience. So identifying those areas. And all of these things you can't, find without capturing all of it. Sort of traditional analytics means you had to anticipate what you care about. So you launch a new feature, you are A/B testing something, and new copy or whatever it may be, but you didn't have the data that you didn't anticipate you'd need, which means you capture it, and then you have to go back and say, well, I wonder if it actually is also related to whether users are seeing this specific error message or this pop-up, or clicking on this old feature that we actually launched a while back and haven't thought about for a while. And that means engineering work and then a bunch of time to start capturing all that new data. And you're kind of back to square one, and then you can really analyze it. So capturing everything, and we call it auto capture, so that you can actually use every single different type of interaction across all of your users as part of that analysis that you do, I think is imperative. So when it comes to identifying those things, those slow loading pages that do matter versus those that don't, or just that are more important within the key journeys for your customer, you need to have all of that data captured.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you made about you have to preempt what you want to know.
Yeah.
And I definitely find that when we first start working with a CRO client, if they just have a traditional analytics tool, then and there's some aspect of it that's not tracked, then it's a massive gap in your knowledge. Whereas clients that have like a DXI tool like FullStory, we have a massive head start because it's so much easier to surface insights much quicker, and then we can act on it quicker and start to set about improving them. So yeah, I definitely think it's a massive advantage to have a tool like that to surface these kinds of issues. And it literally will just flag up when the page load is slow here, you need to fix it, and this is the dropout that's caused as a result. I suppose the other thing is errors as well, because we're talking about the fact that even if you've got a great experience to start with, if it stops working somewhere, you need to know that pretty quickly. So how does that work in the tool? How can you kind of surface those errors?
So we capture them. We have them indexed, so you can search on them, you can find where they're happening, but you can also identify within key journeys. So in retail, and that's kind of what we've been talking about a lot right now, there's a journey towards a purchase oftentimes, or a journey towards signing up for a newsletter, or more information for, tell me about the sales that are coming up. I'm a huge fan of those. They get me every time, and then I always purchase. But so those steps that users take to get towards some sort of successful event, you can build out those funnels. You can see where the drop-off is happening, and you can also use FullStory to analyze what signals, so what errors, what frustrations, what slow loading pages, or what pop-ups or messages people are seeing, whether they interact with it or not, that are statistically related to them not actually converting, so not making it all the way. So it's expensive to get users. They're holding onto their money more tightly. That cost of acquisition is going up, and so you're working hard to get users even to your site, or even to that first step in a funnel to begin with, and then there are all these things going on beneath the surface that are genuinely very hard to find without a tool that's capturing all of the data. And so we'll surface those and help you prioritize, which ones are actually related to people dropping out.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, is because even if you've identified an issue, it's making the link between that and conversion, isn't it? And saying, okay, we know there's an issue, but if I fix this, how much impact is it going to have? Because one of the other things, of course, is the limited dev resource that customers have in terms of being able to fix these things. So you really need to make a compelling case, like, why should I fix this? How much impact is it going to have? And it's the same comes to CRO as well with tests. Which tests are we going to run? So identifying like, how much does this particular problem contribute to the dropout? How much do we think this is going to move the needle? So anything that helps with that to kind of quantify the issue and the impact, so that you can prioritize your dev queue based on site impact, so you really have the biggest impact on revenue. I think is great. And not just errors and issues identifying as well, but also the simplicity of the journey. Because like we're saying, there might not be a showstopper that you're going to leave, but you might still be really frustrated by it. So was there any indication of what users liked about sites beyond kind of speed and errors? Was there any other kind of insights in terms of what makes a good experience?
Yeah, so that flawless digital experience we're all looking for is, to many users, the most important piece of that is that what they do and what they came to do, they can do it quickly and easily. So simple sites and straightforward sites are really important. Yeah,
I think this kind of plays towards, we mentioned that retail is obviously kind of more advanced, but then with financial services, they obviously have these long forms you need to fill in to get a quote for insurance or apply for a bank account or whatever the case may be. So I think the simplicity thing really comes into play with financial services in particular, because there is such a complex process you have to go through in order to engage with that company. So I suppose this is where a tool like FullStory can come in around identifying where users are struggling with that form. We see things where, the questions are asked on insurance forms where it's very difficult to know what it means or understand. One of the things we've done recently for an insurance client was to look at the engagement rates with their help icons on a financial services form to get an insurance quote. And it's really quite eye-opening. So even if you don't know where users are dropping out, if you can just monitor the interactions on the help icons, you can say which questions are not obvious up front that make sense to users straight away. So which ones do they need more help with? And then that's a kind of an indicator that, okay, how can we make this easier to understand quicker? Because I think speed, again, another element of the speed is that it's not just the page load, it's also how quickly can I understand this as well. Like how quickly can I know what I need to answer on this form to get through. And the more work the user has to do, the more likely they are to get frustrated and leave. I think it's the instant gratification thing now, isn't it, where people are getting less and less patient with these things, and people are so stretched for time now, aren't they? And everything, modern life is so complex and to manage, so that the quicker you can make these things, the more customers are going to come back to you. I suppose it's, again, you mentioned the brand loyalty and the experience being key. Is that if that brand can save me time with a simple form, then I'm going to go back there again.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we're stretched for time, and there's so much on the internet. Like it's so easy to leave and go elsewhere. There's always another cat video. There's always another competitor. And it's just a click away, and that's very different from in-person retailers. Yeah, it's one of those unique challenges of digital, and I think identifying as well. And this is something we've done a number of times with customers that we work with, is where in that funnel, which steps specifically are taking a long time. So, I love that. Like, where are people kind of looking at that, that like extra help information to understand what they're actually providing, but also which steps take a long time. It might mean it's confusing, or sometimes, and I've seen this a few times, it's either you need a date picker that's not easy to work. So maybe you can type in a date, but it's not obvious, and so people are just like clicking back to put their, to put that actual date in the date picker. And all it takes is actually making it more obvious that there's a place that you can actually change the entire year or type in the date itself, or a drop down that's searchable, but it's not clear it's searchable. So people are scrolling through, and that's something we found. And so something like session replay is huge when you see, it takes a long time to finish this step.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point with the forms. We're saying if you've got a date of birth with the year and it's a drop down, it's really depressing how far you have to scroll back. So it's it's like not only is this taking a long time, but you're also flagging up how old I am.
And it gets worse every year. Year,
yeah. So I think there's that, frustrations with that. It's like it doesn't need to be that complicated. Just have something where you can type in the year. It's so much easier, unless it's a recent year, like what date do you want this policy to start kind of thing. Yeah. That's a bit easier to use. But if it's something where someone's got to go back in time quite a way, it's just really annoying, isn't it?
And it's such a simple change. And it's not like, companies didn't anticipate, people might want a different way to manage the date picker potentially. Yeah. But it's not always clear. So users may have features available to them that they don't notice, they don't realize, and they miss. Yeah. And so it can be such a simple, even just making it darker or highlighting that little icon for typing can make it so much easier to increase the percentage of users actually using that, feature that makes it easier.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I've seen myself with some clients where they had a tool on the page that you could use, And even though it looked fairly obvious what you were supposed to do with it, we did a test where we put instructions on saying, like, please type in X in order to see what X is, whatever the tool was. And just a simple line of copy explaining what to do made a massive difference. So you think, oh yeah, you assume that it's obvious because you've seen the page 100 times and but it's not necessarily obvious to someone who's never seen it before. So just small little instructions and things that can really help solve the issues around forms like that. You mentioned also the type in the field to get the predictive drop down. I'm seeing that with one of my clients at the moment where they have a field like that, but it's not necessarily obvious what the user has to type, so they're having to come up with multiple variations to try and figure out what's in that drop down that matches what I want. And so trying to mitigate that, come up with strategies to mitigate that. Okay, if a user can't figure out what they need to type, how do we help them? It can have a huge difference, I think, with that kind of experience to alleviate those problems.
And I love that you bring up multiple strategies because, again, you pour your heart and soul into this website. Like, you know it like the back of your hand, and you've worked on, say, developing a feature, or, it's just you're close to it. So you anticipate people are going to think one thing, and it's hard to predict what users en masse are actually going to do. So having a data-driven approach and A/B testing is fantastic. And so testing those strategies and seeing statistically, using that data, what's actually the most effective is really important. Yeah,
I agree. So we were talking about retention of users and how important that is, but was there any other benefits that you found that users were saying where a user experience mattered to them?
Yeah, so apart from just wanting to not lose users to competitors, we found that 55% of consumers in the UK actually said that they'd be willing to pay more for a flawless digital experience.
Okay, interesting.
So it's worth a lot.
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose there's two aspects to the good experience as well. There's the kind of usability of the site, like how easy is it to use. But there's also kind of how the messaging on the site resonates with users and the brand and what the brand offers. So I've seen some recent research around the fact that tests that maybe worked in the past don't necessarily work now. And my assumption on that is maybe that the messaging is maybe not as relevant now as it was then because of this shift that you were mentioning in consumer spending. So how can businesses use a tool like FullStory to keep track of how their messaging is performing?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's fascinating. It totally makes sense that your site could not change at all, but the world is changing. There are, of course, macroeconomic trends, and the way people are spending is changing. The way they're thinking about how they're spending is changing. So they can interact with your site, and their perceptions and their expectations can change. So identifying and monitoring constantly if there are drops in conversion rates, if there are drops in people, navigating to certain areas of the site, engaging with certain features, or searching for certain types of items on the site. So again, capturing all of that data. These types of changes are hard to predict, and that's why having everything captured is really important. You can compare historic data when you have everything captured. It kind of takes away some of those time limits that you have because you can compare everything. So keeping a constant eye on those key metrics that you care about is really important.
Yeah, and I'd say in conjunction with that is like if you keep track and you say, oh, actually this page is not performing as well anymore, and it's a page that's heavily reliant on the messaging to the consumer, and then just reevaluating that message is like, in the current climate, does this message still resonate? And then if you've identified, well, maybe this isn't working anymore, we need to come up with something different, that's where A/B testing can come in to kind of generate some new ideas about how we're going to resonate with the customers in terms of selling our product, which features and benefits of our product are now more important than they maybe were 2 years ago when people weren't as tightening their belts as much. So you could come up with some new hypotheses around messaging, test them, split test them, work out which ones are now working better than the control that you can replace it out with. So I think keeping an eye on that and identifying, the monitoring and identifying when is this stopping working and acting on that to find a new way of reaching and persuading customers.
Yeah, and when it comes to copy, when it comes to content and messaging, the way people interact with pages with heavy amounts of content is interesting. And so some of the kind of data points that you can be capturing are things like how far down are they scrolling? So if it's a blog post, are they actually scrolling to the bottom? Or if it's a product detail page, are they scrolling to where they can get to see the reviews or whatever, details that are important for them to see perhaps? And are they copying text on a page? So copying, going elsewhere and potentially pasting it into Google, find another option. But like identifiers of engagement, as well as just how long are they spending on the page? Is that changing over time? So keeping those, over time trends top of mind, not just conversion rates, but those key interactions that like indicate that someone's actually engaging successfully.
Yeah, you mentioned scrolling. I think that's another good advantage is if you are optimizing a longer copy landing page, is that if users aren't scrolling down to the bottom, then you're not going to get much impact optimizing down at that end because hardly anyone's seeing that page. And I think that's where DXI tools like FullStory can really help as well. Is it not only helps you can kind of identify which pages you need to optimize using traditional tools, but then where tools like FullStory can help is where on the page should I be optimizing? Is there pages of the site that are just not going to have an impact because no one's actually reading it? And then I suppose also, why are they not reading it? Is that because they've got everything they need at the top, or are they not engaged by the content at the top? So I think breaking that down and really pinpointing where the issues are is really helpful for maximising your A/B testing win rate, because you're focusing in the right place.
I love cohort analysis in those cases. Especially, I think marketing campaigns is a great place to start. Are we putting marketing spend in the right place? Like we've spent all this money to get users to our site, maybe running a couple of campaigns. Are certain campaigns performing better in not just the bounce rate, but what people are actually doing on that page? Are certain campaign users scrolling down actually seeing everything versus others?
So we mentioned the rise in acquisition costs. So I suppose a key part of that is if it's getting more expensive to acquire a customer, then you really want to make sure you're retaining them. Did the report kind of give any insight into that at all?
Absolutely. Retaining users is a huge way to increase profits. We actually found that on average, a 5% increase in retention led to a 95% increase in profits.
Wow, that's huge.
It's a lot of,
Yeah, I think it shows how important it is. It's definitely becoming a bigger part of the conversation. I suppose this comes down to also, rather than just building a website and, okay, we've built a website, it works, job done. It's now the shift in thinking about who is using the website. Like, where are they at with their journey with you? They may have only just come to the site for the first time, like when you were buying your vegan powder, you're there for the first time, so you need to make a good impression and say, we are the place you want to do business, versus someone who's been coming back for years and already has some kind of relationship with you and is looking for what you've got that's new rather than what they're currently interested in. So I suppose this is where you mentioned cohorts as well. So it is interesting in terms of the analysis you can do into breaking down your users. So more like an email list, the way you would work on an email list in terms of segmenting them and making sure that each segment is catered for differently so that you can alter the messaging accordingly.
Yeah, I love that, because and that is something we're hearing a lot is websites want to optimize their site for different groups of users. So, 'cause like you mentioned, not every group of users is the same.
Yeah.
I think new users versus like loyal, they're returning, they've been doing it a lot, are different. I mean, for starters, intuitive experiences are much more important for that new group of users. I think I love performing analysis where you look at those loyal users versus those who have not been to the site before, because it's a great way to identify things that are confusing. People will learn, they'll learn how to work around it.
Yeah.
But you look at that group of users who's never seen your site before, it's a fantastic way to find those really quick wins. But also the users who are, engaging with certain types of content or, different groups of products, perhaps. And especially having a login allows you to really narrow in on what you're surfacing within the site, and also using site data. What are people interacting with? What are they dropping out on? To inform the mailing lists you send out as well.
Yeah. I think capturing that information about what users are interested in, what they're not interested in, and utilising their kind of previous browsing behaviour as well to say, okay, this is what they're interested in. Especially if you've got a site with a huge catalogue of products, you want to know, well, actually this person's into only this range versus the others. So all the other messaging is just not going to resonate because they don't have an interest in that area. It was interesting what you were saying about new versus returning as well, because sometimes we see A/B split test results where it's increased the conversion rate for new visitors but reduced it for returning, because like you say, returning users kind of know how to work their way around the site, and they've learnt how all the quirks and how to navigate it. So if you change it, then it throws them off their journey, and they're, oh, okay, this is new. Like with the supermarkets when they change the aisles.
They just did that in mine.
Yeah, it's so annoying. Because I suppose they want you to discover new products, but it's quite it's frustrating when you go in and you're like, oh, hang on, I knew where everything was here, and now it's moved. Yeah, so
100%.
So I think being mindful of that and segmenting your test results and any analysis you're doing to segment to see the differences, because there will be big differences between regular users and new users. So I suppose the other aspect of economic uncertainty is it's not just consumers that are thinking about cutting back their spending, but it's also businesses as well. So I suppose why should businesses continue to invest in a DXI tool like FullStory?
Yeah, so there are a couple of reasons. First of all, because there are still users who are looking to spend money, to buy things, to do things on websites and apps. And if you lose them now due to a negative digital experience, they may be gone forever. They may find a competitor who has invested, who doesn't have those negative experiences, and continue to be loyal, maybe not necessarily to the brand, but as we mentioned earlier, loyal to that really stellar digital experience that they know that they can get from that competitor. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier as well, retention is incredibly important and incredibly profitable. So small changes to your website can lead to increased retention, and as we mentioned, that huge figure of 5% increase in retention leads to potentially 95% increase in profit, which is massive. That's fantastic. I think the other piece is optimizing your website supercharges the other spending that you're doing. Yeah. So the spending you're investing to get people to your site, and the spending on customer support and development, all of that, you're kind of helping that along by having that better experience. And so the consumers who get to your site, they're more likely to stay, they're more likely to spend, they're more likely to return, and you can prioritize effectively. So development, devs, fantastic and so expensive, and so prioritizing, making sure that the time they spend is on the right things, is just has a really, really important impact on money, on the money you're spending.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it's such a shortcut, not just in terms of identifying where a website is leaking revenue, but also in terms of how do you orient your digital teams around the right objectives that are actually going to move the needle, because it's so easy to end up getting caught up in objectives that don't actually move anything, and then it doesn't have an impact on that top level number. So I definitely agree with you, and I think with A/B testing as well, and also we do a lot of UX research as well, where again it's such a shortcut to optimization in terms of, especially with the user research side of things. It's like you might know, like combining the qual with the quant, so you can identify with a tool like FullStory, like, yes, we know there's a problem on this page, and we know people are dropping out here, we know they're having a problem here, but then that's where user research can kind of supplement that and say, okay, well, instead of us guessing why there's a problem there, let's actually ask our users directly. And so I suppose the first step of that is, like you mentioned, the session recording feature, where you can maybe take users who've had that issue and try and pinpoint by watching them, see what they're doing. But nothing beats talking to them directly, where you can say, okay, so, or you'll pick up on other things, they'll say, oh, I've had an issue here, or it's obvious, but it's also the softer things, like how is your brand messaging coming over, or what kind of features are resonating with them, and they'll say, oh, actually, we really, really like that, and you'll notice in a few sessions that multiple users have picked up on that and said, oh, that's really good, I really like that. So you go, okay, we need to make more of this, make this more visible, because when users see it, they love it. So I think, this is where the two sides of the quant with the tools, and then combine it with the qualitative research can really, really give you a head start when it comes to your CRO efforts, your website and redesign efforts, to know exactly that what you're doing matters. So I think, it's definitely still worth investing in these things. In fact, I would say it's probably more important to invest in these things so that you are staying ahead and not falling behind, because, as you said, it's such a fast-paced environment, isn't it? So you need to kind of stay ahead.
Yeah, great point, Sarah. It was so great to chat. Thank you for having me in.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming in. It's been really interesting talking to you and hearing about the report you ran and everything you're doing at FullStory. I think it's great. And thanks so much for joining us today. It's been great.